I'm Eva, and I'm here for another episode of The Charm of It, my knitting podcast. Welcome to all returning viewers. I'm so excited to catch up with you. And to all new viewers, thank you for trying me out. Since you don't know anything about me yet, I would say that I'm a detail-oriented person, and I enjoy researching my hobbies almost as much as I enjoy doing my hobbies. So you will find a lot of knitting nerdery and minutia within my podcast, all related to my various works in progress, my finished objects, and then I like to talk about a general knitting topic every week. This week I'll be talking about the ghosts of knitting present and just musing on my general approach to knitting now because I just recently passed my 3rd year knitting anniversary. This is Thistle, one of my co-hosts. My cat, Moth, is sleeping in that chair right there, and she will often make an appearance as well, so if you're an animal lover, these two like to sit in laps. And let's see, as you can tell, I'm back to my regular setup. I really didn't like the quality of the video once I uploaded it to my computer after last week, and my health is cooperating, so I don't need to be in my giant armchair, so woohoo for that. And any other administrative stuff? I'm drinking hot chocolate today because my upstairs neighbor continues to deprive me of my sleep, so sugar is good. And, oh, I wanted to mention, look, I wrote show notes this time. Okay, I wanted to mention, a couple episodes ago, I mused about the idea of a knit-along with a theme of modifications, and there was a little bit of interest, but not too much. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought that really a knit-along might not be the best format for that, because first of all, I'm really terrible at participating in discussions in knit-alongs. I just like knit my thing, and then if I remember, I share the finished object, but yeah, I'm really bad at that. And so, second of all, if there's only one discussion thread, it's going to be really hard to cross-reference and get that information later. So I thought that maybe we should start a Ravelry group for modifications. I did do some searching in the groups tab, and I couldn't find something that was devoted to modifications and designing from scratch. Here comes Moth. Oh, you can't see her. You can just see her tail. And I couldn't find anything. If there is a group, let me know, because I'd rather just join that than start my own. But otherwise, I think that a group would be an easier forum to kind of compile all of that information in a way that's useful to everyone later. So those are my thoughts on that. And the shawl pattern is out to test knitters. It got off to a rough start when one of my kind test knitters pointed out that I had a problem in row 2. But I sorted that out, and hopefully now it will proceed a little more smoothly. You can tell I haven't done this before. So, yep, that's still in the background going, and I will let you guys know when that pattern is available and talk your ear off about the shawl. Yeah, okay, so I can get straight to my finished objects, which, if I hadn't been entitling this episode The Ghost of Knitting Present, I would have entitled it A Tale of Two Sweaters, because I have 2 finished objects this week, and they are both sweaters. I actually don't like Dickens that much. I don't like the way he writes about women, and this is comparing him to his Victorian male contemporaries like Trollope and Collins, not like, 21st century feminist authors. So, but he does have a catchy way with English, doesn't he? Okay, so I'll tell you about the sweater I'm not wearing first, since my pets are currently obscuring most of this cardigan. This is my Tidal Pool cardigan. Getting it all up. It's a big one, so it's harder to show. Okay. Woo. So, as you can see, this is a long kind of slouchy boyfriend cardigan, and I knit it out of Beaver Slide DK, which is a heavier yarn, and, sorry, my throat is dry. Trying to avoid a hot chocolate mustache or any chocolate on the cardigan. Perhaps that was not the best choice of drink for this podcast. As I was saying, it is in Mountain Beaver Slide DK, or Heavy Sport, in the Mountain Twilight colorway. Beaver Slide is a kind of farm yarn. It's American. Most of their yarns, including this one, are 80% merino, 20% kid mohair, and they're mule spun at a small mill. And So they're very low impact as far as the manufacturing goes. Oh, come on, camera. I'm up here. I'll cut out most of that blurry editing and back to my other lens, so it's a little slower to figure out the focus. Okay, as I was saying, so the manufacturing process is very small scale, ethical, environmentally friendly, all of that stuff. And this yarn is also super affordable. The skeins tend to cost $12 to $15, and you get quite a bit of yardage. I've also knit a sweater out of their fingering weight, and that's 450 yards a skein. And this one I think was 350 yards a skein, but it might have been 450. They're like 4-ounce skeins. So if you don't have a lot of money to spend but would like to try out a farm yarn, then this would be an excellent choice. It's wool and spun, which is why it has this great kind of very cohesive, fluffy appearance. That's thanks to the wool and spun properties. It's very airy and light, and I knit it at a loose gauge. I knit it at 3.5 stitches to the inch in stockinette because I didn't want to overheat. So I knit this cardigan to wear over my pajamas in the morning and at night when I'm walking thistle, and just as a kind of general loungewear, although I also think it'll be really fun to wear it over dresses or skirts to kind of add a little bit of a rustic element. And I've already worn it in the loungewear thing because we have had another cold front. Woohoo, there's snow outside right now. And so I really, really love it. I think that it's a great use of this yarn. And I'm really pleased with the finished object. Right now I'm attempting to show you, my pets are going rogue, the garter stitch elbow patches, which are just one of the many really fun details of the pattern I used, which is by Gudrun Johnston. And it's okay, Thistle. It's okay. It's called the Little Waves pattern. And it is a paid-for pattern on Ravelry. It's put out by Brooklyn Tweed. And I made modifications, but it's written for both men and women. And so my modifications, the most obvious one is I changed the main stitch pattern. Looking at the photos of the finished objects and even the pattern photos before I had the pattern, I thought that the body texture had yarn overs in it, but it doesn't. And I really wanted yarn overs, once again, to make sure that I didn't overheat in the fabric. And so I found a lace pattern that had a similar strong diagonal line. If you look at the Little Waves pattern, it's got these kinds of lines. So I swatched a few from Barbara Walker's Stitch Dictionary, and I ended up on this one, which I believe is called Little Wave. I linked to it on my project page. It's available for free on knittingfool.com. So I did that. I also made it longer because I wanted it to be a proper slouchy cardigan. And so it comes to just around my bum, like just under, or depending on how I button it. So I made it longer. What else did I do? I had to change the gauge because the pattern calls for 4.75 stitches to the inch, and I liked my fabric at 3.5 stitches. And then, of course, I just knit the body to fit myself. So I changed the original cast on for the hips and the waist shaping. Oh, and then it has a shawl collar, but I didn't really want a shawl collar because, unfortunately, even though this is soft, squishy yarn and it's mainly merino, my skin is a little sensitive to mohair. And so I prefer to wear this with a layer underneath, which is fine since I sleep in long sleeve t-shirts. That's why I knit it in the style I did. But it does mean that shawl collars go up higher on your neck, and I didn't want that. So I just did the garter stitch band. I have to start a new segment. My camera only records in like 10-minute segments. And then I will be back to tell you more about the details. Last week, I explained how I figured out what numbers I was going to use to cast on and decrease for the waist and go back up for the bust. So this week I thought I would get into a little bit about how I adapted the yoke instructions. This is a seamless saddle shoulder construction. I can't give away too much because it's a paid for pattern, but it is a super clever thing when it comes together, and it was really fun to watch. Here, let me see if I can show you. So that's the saddle shoulder part where you see how it extends from the sleeve up. And then look at the back of the neck. Isn't that cool? All done seamlessly. So, and then here's the back. So I didn't work all of this out ahead of time. I find that if I try to work everything out on paper, I can start to get overwhelmed. Whereas if I do it in stages and when I'm actually knitting, so I can kind of work as I go, it just feels more doable, especially when you're trying to decrease and maintain pattern. I just find it easier to do that when I'm looking at my work. So all I did was, once I got to the yoke instructions, basically she gives, you decrease until you have, I don't know, let's just say you decrease until you have 47 stitches on the back. That's not the actual number, and you'll see why I gave that example in a minute. So in order for me to figure out how many decreases I would need, I divided 47 by the called for gauge, which is 4.75, which gets you just about 10. See why I picked that number. And then I multiplied that by my gauge, which was 3.5 stitches to the inch. So 10 times 3.5 is 35. So I knew that I needed to decrease until I had 35 stitches left, or whatever the real number is. And then I noticed that my row gauge was actually pretty close to the called for row gauge. So sometimes I would knit a couple rows plain in between the decreases just to make sure that I was getting the length that I needed. I didn't want the arm cis. I'm not really sure how you pronounce that word. I've only typed it. Anyway, to be too high because I knew I'd be wearing this layered over another long sleeve top, so I wanted space. And that worked out really well. I was pretty nervous going in. And once you see the pattern, the yoke directions are quite detailed. And I would recommend reading them through a few times because I wasn't a big fan of the formatting. It's written for both men and women, and there's slight differences, and so the directions kind of get interrupted at various points. But once I read it through a few times, it worked out. And yeah, so, and by the time I did all the decreases and was ready for the saddle shoulder magic, I was totally impressed with it. And then for the button band, the pattern recommends picking up at a gauge of 3 stitches for every 4 rows, but since I just had the incident with the too big neck for this sweater, and my gauge was a little different, and I feel like garter stretches a lot, even with lace, so I picked up at a rate of 2 for every 3 rows, and that worked out really well. I did add just a little bit of short row shaping to the back of the neck, because since I didn't know how the saddle shoulder was going to work, I couldn't really add it to the body. Well, I could have, but I didn't want to deal with that fuss, so I just added a few more rows. And you can see, usually I space the short rows out more, but I don't know, I put them all one next to each other, so there's a little bit of a bubble there, but when you're wearing it, it doesn't show as a bubble. It conforms to my neck nicely. And I will include modeling shots in my finished object page. I was going to put it on, but since the moth is in my lap, you just can't see her. I won't disturb them, plus you won't be able to see the full thing anyway, but I really love how it turned out. So I like a lot of the details. There's a lovely I-cord bind-off finish that I wasn't sure if I needed it since it was going to be a rustic sweater, but I really like the touch that it adds. And then this was my first time doing pockets, and I was not impressed with how the pattern had you do the pockets. I'm not sure how much I can talk about since it's a paid-for pattern. Come on, camera. You want to show them. There we go. Okay, so this is the pocket. So to me, if you want to have a pocket and you want it to be in the pattern, you would knit the pattern up, put these stitches on waste yarn, or actually what I would do is knit them the way that you do for an afterthought thumb or heel, and then continue knitting the body, and then come back and pull out the yarn, and you'd have live stitches. You'd have live stitches here that you could bind off, and then you'd have another set of live stitches, and you could knit those down and seam the pocket on the inside. This pattern had you do it in reverse. So not only did you have this big hole at the bottom for most of the knitting, which annoyed me, I ended up safety pinning it shut. It kept distracting me. But then you have to knit another front in pattern and seam it in pattern. So I was mattress seaming these sides and trying my best to make all the rows line up so that it would look good. And I just feel like it is far fiddlier than my imaginary method would be. Don't know if my imaginary method would work because I've never done pockets, but it works on Afterthought Thumbs. It worked to convert those mittens, so I'm gonna do some reading. Yeah, I would not recommend that pocket method. Finally, as you can see, I did 7 buttons. These are just buttons that I picked up at Joann's years ago. Joann's is like a big box craft and sewing store for those of you who aren't in the US. And then on the other side I did buttonholes. I like Pam Allen's buttonhole technique. It's called a double yarn over one, but I only do single yarn overs because I'm a loose knitter, so I don't need the double yarn over. And she recommends in the episode Buttons and Button Bands on Knit FM, which is an incredibly informative podcast. It's an audio podcast, especially the early episodes. I recommend you listen to it if you're interested in knitting a sweater. So she recommends, in order to have the buttons line up straight when you're wearing a cardigan, to offset both the buttonholes and the buttons a little on the band. So instead of putting them right in the middle, put each one a little closer to the body, and then when you button it and it gets pulled on as you're wearing it, it ends up looking in the center. And I first did that for my Melusine cardigan, and I really liked the results, so I do that for all my cardigans now. And I think that's everything to talk about with the Tidepool cardigan. As you can see, blocking changed the fabric considerably. It made it really nice and cozy and rustic. Is rustic the word I want? I don't know, casual. I enjoy a feminine style, but I also enjoy a feminine style that is rugged at the same time. Like, I don't know. I like to wear feminine clothes that still let me move and go to the woods and that kind of thing. And I think that this sweater is just what I wanted. The pattern has you knit extra long cuffs in 1x1 ribs so that you can either unroll them or roll them up, which is really nice and functional for my evening dog walks. You know, it's always colder in the evening, so that way I can just roll down the cuffs and I don't have to dig out my mittens if it's been warm enough during the day that I didn't have any. So yeah. Not sure if I would buy another Brooklyn tweed pattern. Now that I've written my own pattern, I realize how challenging it is to write something succinctly and to have the layout work, and I think it's just personal preference, but the layout just really didn't work for me. And I thought some of their decisions were really weird. Like, they include quite a few tutorials at the end about what they call special techniques like Kitchenering, but they also have how to web block under special techniques, but they didn't include how to seam, which, I mean, if you don't know how to mattress seam and you're trying to seam those front pockets, I don't think you're going to be happy with the end result. So that just seemed like a weird oversight to me. And then I kept having to flip back and forth to check some gauge since I was modifying. That's Thistle over there beating up the chair. If you're wondering why it's rocking, I don't have a ghost. And since I read patterns on my phone, I use the free app JKnit Lite. I'll link to that in the show notes. And just where the gauge was, and then the schematics were right after the gauge, so I'd have to flip through them every time. And I don't know, it just didn't seem to work that well with my knitting style. But I'm very happy with the final result, and I really loved the yoke construction. I thought it was really clever and really fun to watch come together. And I definitely want to knit the actual texture stitch from that sweater again. So I'm pleased that I have the pattern. But, I mean, most of Brooklyn tweed stuff just doesn't appeal to me stylistically anyway, because I prefer more fitted looks. Like, I added more waist shaping to the cardigan. Although I still had positive ease, but I had a bunch of negative ease in the hips. You'll see that on my project page. Because it hits on my low hips, my bum is 35 inches around at its widest point, and that's where the sweater was hitting. And so I haven't measured the sweater, but I'm pretty sure I knit it with at least 3 inches of negative ease. And that's because I like my bum, so I didn't want it getting lost in an oversized sweater. But I did put some positive ease in the waist, I think a couple of inches. And then I think the bust, somewhere between 0 ease and 1 inch of positive ease. I'll measure the sweater and include all those details on my project page so you can see how it looks versus the measurements. And now I'll start another segment talking about my next sweater. Moth has kindly given Thistle my lap for a little bit, so we'll see how long that lasts in peace. Hope I didn't talk your ear off. I find sweater construction terribly interesting, so I thought I'd include details in case they're helpful. Okay, so the big exciting finished object is of course my Selkie second skein cardigan, which I designed myself. It is an Aran style cardigan, and it was kind of my tribute to 3 years of knitting, and I just had a lot of fun with it. And then as I mentioned last week, I tried it on when it was finished, and I had a bit of a crisis when I saw how poorly it fit. But it turns out the neckline change fixed everything. I shared a photo on Instagram right after I changed it just because I was super excited. And so you can see it fits really well now. There are still some things that I would change if I were going to make this saddle shoulder sweater from Ann Budd's Handy Book of Knitting Patterns again, or Handy Book of Sweaters. I would add more decreases going along here because this is just right at my shoulder line, and I think a set-in sleeve looks better with a little further in. And her regular set-in sleeve pattern does come further in, so I'm not really sure. But I love this cardigan now, and I'm so happy. So I'll talk about the yarn first. I knit it out of Elsa Wool Cormo in the sport weight woolen spun option. Elsa Wool is another American farm yarn that is low impact as far as manufacturing goes. It's only sold in natural colors, ranging from white to she blends the white with the darker one, so you have quite a few options. And this is one of my favorite yarns that I've ever knit with. Cormo is incredibly soft. It is. I have a few thrifted cashmere sweaters, and I prefer the feel of Cormo to the feel of cashmere, because not only is Cormo incredibly soft, like it's never even thought of itching me, but it's also velvety. And Elsa is the woman who runs Elsa Wool, and she is just a wizard with yarn. I know that she works with the spinners or the mill to make sure that it's what she wants, and she has it in a tight 2-ply twist that just brings out so much bounce and magic. This is my second sweater in her yarn. I've also knit one out of the fingering weight, and it's just a joy to wear. Since it's woolen spun, it breathes really well, so you don't overheat as easily, but it keeps you really warm. And yeah, I mean, I can wear this and I feel absolutely no hint of an itch. I am not super sensitive to wool, but I don't have cast iron skin either. I would put myself in the middle in case that helps you. But yeah, and once again, quite affordable. Not as affordable as Beaver Slide, but I believe this, I can't remember. I think most of them run $17 to $18. I know it goes up $1 for each of the darker colors, so she must have more white wool. But I found that woolen spun yarn, it doesn't take as much yardage to make a sweater. So, for example, this one is heavily cabled, and cables require a lot of yarn, and it still took less than 4 skeins. I think 3.5 skeins. But the jumper that I made out of the fingering weight, it was mainly stockinette and then a Guernsey style yoke, so just some purl and knit textures. And that took, I want to say, only 2 skeins of yarn. And I think the fingering weight is $17 to $20 a skein, so that's like a $40 sweater. And for me, this is an incredibly luxurious fiber, so yeah, I would recommend looking into Elsa Wool. Of course, depending on what size you wear and how much ease you like in your sweaters, that affects your yardage too, and shortness. My jumper was fairly short because I wanted to wear it over skirts. More pet chaos. But back to this sweater. So that, yeah, I love Elsa Wool. I'll be talking about it when I start doing my yarn reviews because I've knit with quite a bit of it at this point, and I have plans to knit with it again. So now that the pets are blocking the view again, but hopefully you can see, what I ended up doing is I picked up and did the seed collar, the shawl collar with the short row shaping again with many fewer stitches. I ended up my ratio was 1 stitch for every 2 rows, so my ratio was 1:2, and that worked really well. And so I finished it, and I noticed that when I wore it, what was happening when I had it as a regular shawl collar was it was still sliding off my shoulder. So I went ahead and stitched it down up to here, just to make sure that that wasn't going to spread out, because I also, this neckline is a little lower than the round necks I usually wear, so I didn't want it to spread and show more than I was comfortable with. And so that worked really well. Of course, you lose the cool shawl collar look, but I still think it looks nice. And it has kept its line really well. This is the second day that I've worn it, like full day, and it hasn't stretched out at all. I can't show you a lot of the details, but I'll put them on my project page. And of course, if you've been watching, you've seen all the details of the various pieces as I finish them. But here is the shell ribbing, little shells ribbing from Barbara Walker's Stitch Dictionary. I did a nice deep cuff, and then the EXO continues all the way up over my shoulder. As regular viewers know, I named this my Selkie Second Skin cardigan because, of course, Aran sweaters come from an Irish island, and there are a lot of traditions in that kind of geography about Selkies, which are women who are seals, but they can also become human women. And in the traditional stories, fishermen can make Selkies their wives by stealing their seal skins, so they can't go back to the ocean. And so they become wives and mothers, but they're always sad, and eventually they always find their seal skin and escape back to the sea. And as a 21st century feminist, I enjoy reimagining myths and legends, and so I imagined a different story where a fisherman fell in love with a Selkie and spent months knitting a sweater that fit her just right to show how devoted he was and how good he was at observing her, and then offered her the sweater and gave her the choice as to whether she wanted to become his wife or not. And she would be able to switch between her sweater and her sealskin whenever she wanted to. So that was the inspiration for this sweater. And that's why I did the cuffs a little longer, because if you're a fisherman's wife, you don't want any kind of bagginess that's going to, go over and possibly get dirty with like gutting fish. And they're really easy to push up. And let's see. I think I talked about the buttons last week. So I believe that is all of the stories that I have for this sweater. I will put the details on my Ravelry project page as far as the cables that I used, because I did not design these cables. I did modify a few of them to be wider, but I'll tell you the cables. This one, the front piece ones are Alice Starmore, and then the bordering ones are, the braid one is from Alice Starmore's Aran Knitting as well, and then this is the wheat ear one, and this one is also on the back, and then there's one more border cable on the back, and then a big panel, and both of those come from Barbara Walker's Stitch Treasury, which you can also find for free at knittingfool.com, so I'll be able to include links to those cables. I can't imagine anyone would want a sweater just like mine, but if it gives you ideas for your own sweater. And then I did the waist. I took a photo of the outfit I'm wearing today, so I'll put it in here instead of in Knits in the Wild so you can see. Just while I talk about the other details. The waist, I did 3 welts, which I had never done before, but it turns out it's pretty simple. And those are in seat stitch, as are the button band and the collar. And the little waist increases at the sides. And for a welt, what you do is, I did 6-row welts. So I knit 6 rows, and then on the 7th row, I went back and used a much smaller needle to go through and pick up stitches on the wrong side of the 6 rows down. And then you just knit 2 together, kind of like a 3-needle bind off, and that creates the welt. So I did 3 of those just because I wanted the waistband to kind of stand up to the peplum and still have some interest. The peplum, I wrote the directions out in case you don't know how to decrease in honeycomb. I don't know if they'll be useful to anyone else, but they are on my project page. And yeah, I learned so much knitting this sweater. It was seamed, And I'm really glad it was seamed, because the other fit issue that I had to do other than the collar was I had made a bit too much. I did really rapid waist increases, and I think I had a bit of body dysmorphia going on. I think I just decided that my rib cage was super broad, so I was afraid it would pull the cables if I didn't increase quickly. But of course, when I tried it on, my rib cage is not as broad as my bust line. So that was sticking out a little strangely. But since it was seamed, all I needed to do was just I just pinched it together and re-seamed it with an inch of fabric on the inside, and I don't even feel that when I'm wearing it. So easy fix. And next time I will know that, my rib cage doesn't need all this special accommodation. And after all of that talking, I will start a new segment, and we will be able to get to the topic this week. So this week I thought I would talk a little bit about how I knit now, and I'm also going to insert a video. I recorded this video at the same time that I did the tutorial for cabling without a cable needle, and I'm so glad that that helped some of you. Thanks so much for reaching out and telling me. That really pleased me, because I wasn't sure if it would be useful or not, so I will try to record some more tutorials in the future. If there's anything you would like me to do a tutorial for, like any of the techniques that I talk about that you're not sure of, let me know, and I can start with those, because I don't know if matcher's seaming or what, because you can find most of them on YouTube. But if you want me to put them in the podcast, I'm happy to do that. Okay, so I recorded how I knit continental style because I was knitting on my knee-high Chagall socks, and so that's what I was doing. So I'll insert that here just so that you get an idea of how I knit. So when I'm knitting continental or left-handed or picking, there are too many names for techniques, I tension the yarn twice around my pinky, and depending on what I'm knitting, either twice around my pointer finger or 3 times. I do 3 times for socks. I'm generally a loose knitter, so I'm always trying to tighten myself up. Oh, it's easier to do when I'm not thinking about it. Okay. And then I've got a stitch marker there because I'm counting rows, since this is the second one. So here we go. This is just the knit stitch, and then on the next row I'll be able to show you how I purl, since it's 2x2 rib. It's funny doing these videos. I'm going to keep talking. I suppose this is the angle I actually work at, but it might not be the most useful for you to see what I'm doing. So for the last needle, I will try to do it a little more flat. Okay. Oh, not in the frame anymore. I don't know if this is a better angle or not. It's a lot trickier for me to knit in that angle. And obviously I use 5 DPNs when I'm knitting in circles, unless it's a really tiny circle for a stuffed animal. I just find if I use 4, so if I have the stitches on 3 making a triangle, I tend to get more stress points, and it just doesn't feel as comfortable. I'll get some more yarn. And my DPNs are 6 inches long, which is 15 centimeters. And that's what most of my DPNs are. And then a couple months ago, I tried knitting socks on 5-inch or around 12 centimeter needles for the first time. And it certainly went a little more quickly because I didn't have to be adjusting the tips all the time. But these are my Diacraft Darn Pretty needles, and I love them. And they're not currently available for sale. So the material, the wood that Diacraft uses, their suppliers' warehouses burned to the ground a couple years ago, and so that's why you cannot order these needles anymore. So if they secure a new supplier, then I might put it in order for some 5 inches in size 0s, which is my usual sock size. This is being knit on 1.5 right now because they're knee socks, so I did size 0 for the part that's going to be my foot, and then I did some initial calf shaping by just changing my needle size since I don't think you need the material to be quite so snug around your leg as you do around your foot. There's not the constant abrasion from your shoe. And there you have it. I think I'm pretty much back to my normal knitting self. The jitters must have gone away. And I don't actually know if I'm a fast or slow knitter compared to other people. Since I don't have any real life knitting friends, I only see what my online friends are doing, and of course I don't know how many hours they're spending on their progress, and it doesn't really matter. I'm just always curious about how other people knit, and so I guess that's what I'm more interested in. Not am I faster or slower, but just how close I am to the average. I wouldn't think that I'm particularly fast, but I just know that I enjoy my knitting. I'm certainly faster than I was when I began knitting. That was in exercise and patience. Luckily, when you begin knitting, you don't have anything to compare it to, so you don't realize how long everything's taking you. And in my case, I didn't do anything in plain stockinette until I'd been knitting for over a year, so I didn't realize how much more slowly complicated patterns go. And once again, I think that that was actually a good thing. When I finally knit something in plain stockinette, I was flabbergasted at how quickly it grew because it was also in worsted weight, so that was pretty funny. And I'll see you back in a few minutes. So as I said in that section, I don't really know whether my knitting speed is, slow, average, or fast compared to other people's. Feel free to share or chime in. I know that sometimes people wonder how I get so much knitting done, and I would say that I usually knit 1 to 3 hours a day, and sometimes a little more on Friday nights and Saturdays. So that's how I get it done. Try to knit for about an hour around lunch, and then an hour or two in the evenings. Of course, sometimes my health doesn't allow that. But yeah, that's the general thing. And remember, I'm usually recording episodes every other week, so you're seeing like 2 weeks worth of knitting progress. What happened with my tide pool cardigan, and the reason why I have that as a finished object, is that I saw in the forecast that we had a chance of snow, and I saw that on, I think, Wednesday or Thursday, and that totally motivated me to only knit on that for a couple days instead of my usual switching, because I really wanted it done so I could wear it. So yeah. Okay, so as that implies, I'm generally a polygamous knitter these days, not a monogamous one. Part of that is for health reasons. I took up knitting because I have rheumatoid arthritis, and a book I was reading about RA said that knitting is good for you, and it is. I've slowly been able to build up to how much I can knit over time, and now I'm on various arthritis medications as well that expand my capabilities. That book also recommended that you should switch between yarn weights and needle sizes to give your hands a break. So that's why I always have multiple projects, and I try really hard to make sure that they're using different needles, different yarn weights, and also different techniques. So, cables, lace, regular stockinette, all of those use slightly different muscles. So that's why I like having several projects going at once. But I usually have 3 to 4 going at once, sometimes 5, but I'm really more comfortable with no more than 4. And if I have 4, one of them is usually just a very simple project that I can pick up and knit when I'm waiting for the tea to boil, or if I'm talking with my mom or something on the phone. A lot of what I knit is a little more complex, so it needs charts or I need to be paying attention. And so I like having at least one simple project, sometimes more. And that's why I will sometimes have a 4th. Or just because I felt like casting something on. But yeah, I start to feel panicky if I have more than 4 or 5 because I'm not sure how I would make progress on them all. I don't like having something be a work in progress, like lingering in the basket. I like to actively work on everything. And I do actively rotate in every knitting session. So if I sit down for an hour to watch a podcast and knit, I have my basket beside me and I'll knit on one project for like 10, 15 minutes and then take a little break and then knit on the next project for 10 or 15 minutes. So it's pretty regimented. So I do tend to I'm devoted to my projects, you know. I won't just I do not cast things on until I have finished something. And I tend to only have one thing in each category going. Although I did just do 2 cardigans at the same time, so maybe I'm changing my ways. But yeah. So that's where I stand on monogamy versus polygamy. I was a monogamous knitter when I began because I didn't have many needles and I didn't have much yarn, and I didn't understand why I would buy yarn if I wasn't immediately casting on with it. So, but I like being able to rotate. I find that sometimes I'm just in the mood for a certain type of knitting, and it's nice. You know, you have your relaxing knitting, you have your mentally stimulating knitting, and you have your simple project for when your complex project has gone terribly wrong and you need to be comforted. And that way, when you finish one project, you're not faced with an empty knitting basket and trying to figure out what you need to cast on next. So those are, to me, the advantages of having several projects at various states of completion at once. I also wanted to weigh in on the product versus process knitting divide. So I'm not really sure I believe in this divide. I think that we're strangely prone to wanting to make false dichotomies, like we talk about, are children more affected by nature or nurture? And obviously the answer is both, right? I mean, there's no real need to pick one or the other. So I'm not really sure what it is about people that makes us, you know, want to divide everything and then decide what camp we're in. I'm totally prone to this as well, so, you know, I'm human, but it kind of mystifies me. So I was always hesitant to do this label, but then I was recently listening to an audiobook by Stephanie Pearl McPhee. It's the Cast Off one, and she writes the very well-known Yarn Harlot blog. And so she had a little thing about product versus process knitter, and she included a little quiz, and all of my answers were product knitter answers. So perhaps I am a product knitter. I mean, I know that I only knit things that I'm going to use and wear, and when I knit things for other people, I want to make sure it's something that they're going to use and wear, so I will often consult them on yarn choice, color choice, that kind of thing, rather than risk a surprise present not being used. So I'm certainly, I would never knit something just because I thought it looked neat if I didn't think I was going to use it, which apparently makes me a product knitter. And the reason why I have not embraced the product knitter categorization before is because I also really enjoy the process. I love knitting. I love trying new techniques. I love researching those techniques. I love designing my own things and working out all of the math and everything. And I love, of course, sitting down and actually knitting. I mean, if all I wanted was a sweater, I'm pretty sure that hand knitting is not the simplest. You know, like if I thought that knitting itself was not enjoyable, I don't think I would care that much about a sweater to like make myself suffer through every stitch. So that's why I'm not sure whether that's a true division or not. But according to Stephanie Pearl McPhee's quiz, I am solidly in the product knitter camp. Take that for what you will. I'm sure most of my regular viewers are saying, of course you're a product knitter, Eva. Like, what? So I'm not really sure how that goes. And then one of my favorite audio podcasts, The Prairie Girls, Knit and Spin, and then one of my other favorites, Em of Knitting Pretty, they've both also talked about, they add 2 more P's. So product, process, and then progress versus pizzazz. And I think the main gist is pizzazz are people who will cast on whenever anything looks interesting because they want to start knitting it right away. And progress are people who limit the amount of projects they have because they like to finish their projects before they begin a new one. And I'm definitely in the progress camp. Definitely. I cannot imagine just casting on another pair of socks because I really want to knit it if I haven't finished my current pair, because then it's just going to take longer to knit them both. And then it'll be longer before I can wear socks. See? So what I do, however, is I daydream about knitting a lot, of course, and so that's when I'll like find patterns and match them up with the yarn in my stash or add them to my queue or that kind of thing. So I imaginary cast on a bunch of projects, but in reality, I do not cast on a lot because I like the forward momentum. I hope that these ramblings were enjoyable. I feel like they were a little unfocused. Perhaps I should have done more brainstorming before I sat down to record. But up next, I will talk about my works in progress. I'm back, and now I will talk about my works in progress. As you can imagine, since I finished 2 cardigans this past week, I don't have that many works in progress at the moment. You've seen 2 of them before. I will show you those first. So first up is my Stella Polaris cowl, which I'm knitting for a friend as kind of a bargain, barter trade thing. And it is knit with the Star Shower cowl, which is a paid-for pattern that I am enjoying immensely and would certainly recommend. So I've just about finished the first skein. I am knitting this out of Quince & Company's Turn. Sorry about the cat hair everywhere. Yes, that's you. Quince & Company's Turn, which is their fingering weight, 70% wool, 30% Tussa silk. Tussa means that the silkworms are allowed to break out of their cocoons. They're not boiled alive the way that regular silk is created, in case you were wondering. So yes, Turn in one of the new colorways, which is Basalt. It's the rock. Is it Basalt? Basalt? Basalt. It's a lovely gray with kind of sea green undertones. And I'm very excited that they added it to their lineup because their only other gray in Turn, which is one of my favorite yarns ever, is Stonington, which is a beautiful silvery gray, but it's too cool for me. So I can't make like a sweater out of it. So as you can see, this cowl is full of textured deliciousness. I have really loved knitting on it, and it's progressed quite quickly. Since I have finished the first skein, I'm a little over halfway done. And I've just finished section 4. There are 6 sections. I'm still not used to how shawls and cowls get bigger as you go. That still feels disorienting to me. But I thought I'm knitting this on size 5 needles, which is, I think, what the pattern calls for, actually. Maybe it calls for 6s. I'm a loose knitter. I can't remember. I was measuring gauge. I think it'll block out to a little bit bigger. But as I was saying, I stopped here and put stitch, I don't know what these are called, the bits where the knitting can't fall off, because I wanted to show you that even at section 4, so this is 220 yards of yarn, and there's enough left of this skein for me to bind off, it actually makes a really nice sized little cowl. So this could be a great stash buster. I mean, I'm going to keep knitting the full pattern for my friend, but for myself, I can totally see just, knitting up a little thing, 50 grams, 220 yards. Don't really know what that is in meters, I'm sorry. Somewhere around 200, I think. Hi, baby. I think that makes a really nice little, piece of neckwear on its own, decorative, especially if you have a really lovely skein of yarn, but not a lot of it, so you'd like it near your face. Just thought I'd let you guys know. This is, as I said, a paid-for pattern. It is $5, and it's very clear. I'm not having any problems with the instructions, and it's really, really cleverly done. I can see using the blueprint for this with different textures in the future, so I think it was well worth the $5 from my perspective. I found that I find it easier to pay for patterns when I'm making things for others. I don't know why that is about me. Maybe I think others are worth $5, but I need to design my own. I don't know. But yeah, so I'm really pleased with how this is turning out. And I will be winding up the yarn hopefully soon. I've been having neck and shoulder problems because not getting enough sleep because of my neighbor, and so some of my illnesses are messing up. And since I hand wind all of my yarn, I have to wait until my neck and shoulders are feeling up for it. But I'll be spending a lot of time with my heating pad, so hopefully I'll be able to continue this soon. This is very, very close to simple knitting for me. Before I cast on a project you'll see soon, this was what I grabbed when I needed to not be thinking and just wanted to knit a bit, because there are quite a few rest rows and the texture is super easy to memorize, so you don't have to read a chart or anything. And there are a lot of rows where nothing happens as far as increases go. So really, really fun knit. I'm enjoying it. And Stella Polaris, of course, is the North Star. I've been watching an astronomy class on Open Yale, which are basically college courses that they've recorded the lectures of, and you can watch them for free. And it's quite interesting. So I've got lots of future project names for astronomy themed stored up. I'll show you my new project next, since it's also astronomy themed. These are my nebulized socks. I dyed up the yarn last week and went into exhaustive detail about that and showed you some photos. And my show notes linked you to some more specific photos that I couldn't share on my video because of copyright issues. And so I finally cast on yesterday. It took me a while. The teal yarn, oh man, I got that so tangled when I was dyeing it, so skeining it took a while. And then I wanted to finish, so I skeined them into cute little mini cakes. So this is all the mini cakes I need for the first sock. I'm going to make these knee highs or maybe even stockings, as high as they can go. So this one I didn't dye, it's just leftovers. The fiber, or sprout, seedling, I'm sorry, I'll link it on my project page. This one is Knit Picks Hawthorn, over-dyed by me, and with hair, sorry guys. This one is Superwash BFL that I ordered from an Etsy shop undyed to try dyeing before, and then I over-dyed it after I knit the first pair of socks. And this is Ull, Baby Ull, it's the Norwegian fingering weight. And once again, I over-dyed it just a little. You can hear the details about that last week. So I wanted to try helix stripes, which are a way of knitting one-row stripes without any jogs. And guys, I'm pretty sure that this is witchcraft. Okay, so here's what I've got so far. And that's what I'm going to make the front. I'll get into more of that detail soon. And no jogs. Don't know if you can see. And no jogs. Okay, so here's the witchcraft part. I will undo, because people always ask. This is a Knitsy needle holder. It's made in the USA. I got it for Christmas. I love it. This is a 6-inch one. It protects my DPNs. It's a little pricey. I believe it's $45, but it's really well made. So I was really, really happy to get it for Christmas, and I use it all the time. And especially since my favorite needles are no longer being manufactured, and I use size 0 needles to knit socks. It's really reassuring to know that they're well protected. Knitsy with a Z, K-N-I-T-Z-Y. Okay, so I'm not sure if you'll be able to see this. Well, you won't be able to see it at all if the camera doesn't focus. There we go. So these are in the gray color, but these stitches are blue. And then right now, the back stitches are teal. So with helix knitting, what you do is you pick how many colors you want. In my case, I wanted 4. Then you divide the amount of stitches that you're knitting in a round evenly by those colors, and that's easy for me because I knit my socks on 4 DPNs. And then you knit each section using a different colored yarn on every round. And then somehow, well, not somehow, Tech Knitter explains it, but I prefer to think of it as witchcraft. Once you've knit a few rounds, the colors end up doing single row stripes. You don't have to worry about jogs because basically they're barber pulling up. So they're going round and round, each at their own pace. So all you do is you knit across a needle, and then when you come to the next yarn end, you drop the one you're currently working with and start with the yarn end too. So For instance, last time this needle was knit using blue yarn, so the next round I'll switch to this needle. I'm sorry about the focus. Okay, so right now this one has blue stitches on it, so next round I will knit this needle with blue stitches. And the reason why there are no current fuchsia stitches is because even though you're knitting 1 DPN of each color, at some point there's a switch in the round. Does that make sense? So if I had stopped knitting here, then, okay, if I had stopped knitting here, then this needle would be fuchsia instead of teal. And when I first, so I knit the toe in one color, and when I first switched to the multicolors, I was really concerned about why were there 2 needles worth of one color in each round, but it turns out that it works. It's fine. That's what's supposed to be happening. You want to try this. I would recommend joining the first color at the edge, because if you're doing 4 colors, because then you end up with your 2 needles of the same color across what can be the top of the sock. So you don't have any, like back here on this side, you can see where I started the different colors, but on this side, it's just one straight round all around. So I'm really enjoying it so far. Of course, it's a little fiddlier because at the end of every DPN, you have to switch what yarn you're using. I think next time I would knit English style instead of continental style, just because the way I tension my yarn when I'm knitting continental is a little more complex, so it just takes a few extra seconds each time I switch needles. But for me, it's totally doable, and just every few rounds I stop and I let the sock dangle to untwist the colors. I have to start a new segment and then I'll be back. As I was saying, I find it very doable, and I've only knit 1 pair of socks out of self-striping yarn, and that was Knit Picks Felici, and I have to admit, it annoyed me. I did not like that I could not choose the width of the stripes, and I didn't like that I couldn't choose the color order of the stripes. And the stripes were a bit thick for me, and I think that's because I have fairly small feet, so my socks are not very many stitches around. So I definitely prefer knitting helix striped socks than self-striping yarn. If you want, you could do a 2-round stripe instead of a 1-round stripe if you were doing 2 colors. What you would do is you would still make your 4 balls of yarn, and you would still alternate them, but you'd be doing 2 of each color in a row. Does that make sense? At least I'm pretty sure that would work. I don't see why it wouldn't. The one other thing you have to think about is when you join the colors, that's the order the stripes are going to be in forever. So decide what order you want them in before you join them in. So these are my nebulae socks. When I was dyeing them, I was very inspired by photographs of deep space and nebulae. And I feel like the inside of the sock, the reverse stockinette, is truer to that inspiration. Isn't that lovely? So I'm pretty sure that when I get to the heel, and I'm knitting these toe up so that I can make them as long as I can. Usually I prefer top down, like if there's no other differences, but for using up all my yarn, toe up is the way to go. Plus, I wasn't sure how much I would enjoy the helix knitting, and if you start toe up, I can always stop at the ankle or whatever. Whereas if I cast on for enough stitches to fit my calf, I'm not going to be able to shorten that sock later. So that's why I was doing it toe up. Anyway, so yeah, I really love the reverse stockinette side in the helix striping. So when I get to the heel, and I found a way to do a traditional heel flap construction with toe-up socks. You can find that linked on my project pages for my Chagall and Shadow socks and my This Little Piggy socks. There's a tutorial I found online. So when I get to that point, I'm going to figure out how to do that heel flap to make this side the public side, because I prefer that. For this particular color, for these particular colors, and for the inspiration, I prefer that to this. But I will definitely do ones with the stockinette as the outside in future. I have lots of ideas for color plans and using up scraps and that kind of thing. I did a Turkish cast on this time because I was complaining about, sorry, I can't hold it up anymore. I was complaining a few podcasts ago about how Judy's magic cast on is a little fiddly, and several people said I should try the Turkish cast on, and it worked. It was still fiddly with DPNs, but not as fiddly, so I will definitely be using that for future socks. And just for fun, I tried putting my increases 2 stitches in from the edge instead of 1 stitch in, which made a super round toe. I have very round feet, but I don't think they're quite this round. Something to think about, especially for mittens. Wouldn't that be a nice mitten top? So the increase pattern, or decreases if you were doing a traditional mitten, what I did is, so everything happens 2 stitches in from the edge on the needles, and then I did 3 or 4 rows where I increased every round, and then 1 or 2 rows where I increased every other round. I have quite a broad toe box. And those are my nebulized socks. So yeah, I'm really pleased. The one thing that I'm having a little bit of trouble with, and hopefully I'll adjust as I go, so that's another reason I'm glad I'm doing toe up, because this part will be more hidden, is you can see a little bit of tensioning issues right where the needles join. And that's because whenever you pick up your new yarn, you should not pull it tight. You shouldn't tug, but the way that I tension automatically tugs it, so then I have to try to kind of loosen that stitch back up from the previous row. Yeah, I'm really enjoying these. And because of the way it works, you're really only changing yarn 3 times in each round, so it's not quite as fiddly as it sounds. I really don't find it fiddly, so that is my current, simple, really easy, don't have to think about it project. And then my last current work in progress, another pair of socks. These are a gift for a friend, a birthday gift for a very dear friend who is crafty herself and has given me many handmade gifts over the years. So these are my Elephants Mean True Friendship socks, and they are knit using the Water for Elephant pattern, which is a stranded knitting pattern. I finished the first sock. And as you can see, I have begun the second, but I have a ways to go. Luckily, I find this really enjoyable, so I'm hoping to have these finished within a week or a week and a half, because that's when I should see my friend again. And these are made out of Quince & Company's Finch, which is their 100% wool fingering yarn, in apricot and sabine. Sabine is the charcoal gray. Apricot is the yellow-orange color. I think it's a golden color. And I pretty much love all the Quince yarns, let's be honest. And I've made several pairs of socks out of Finch, and I think it holds up great. I wash it in the machine, even though it's not superwash yarn. I dry it. I air dry, but we can talk about that more when I get to yarn reviews. But yeah, so I'm super happy with how these are turning out, and I'm just following what I did on the first one at this point. I mentioned last time most of the adaptations that I made to the pattern because my friend wears a larger shoe size than the pattern calls for, but I didn't mention the really obvious adaptation, which is one that a lot of people who have knit this pattern have used, and that is that the pattern, you only have the elephant on the leg, and the foot is just this decorative diamond. That one. Yep. And so I made the elephant on the foot too, because you can never have too many elephants. That does require a little bit of flipping back and forth between charts, so it's a little bit annoying, but totally worth it. This used to be a free pattern, but now it's paid for. I believe it's $4 now, and I think it's a really well formatted pattern. The charts are very easy to read. She's divided them up. There's like a little space between each quarter, so if you use DPNs, or what I do is I've got a marker where each of those graphs are, so that way I always know when I'm, if I've gotten off at all, and I just find these such a pleasure to knit. I said last time, this is my first time working with tiny circulars. These are 9-inch Chiagri circulars, and I expected to not enjoy it at all, but it turns out I love it. For color work, I will still use my regular DPNs for most things, but I find it so much easier to keep my stranded tension good when there are no joins. I don't think I'd be able to use these for my own socks because my feet are less than 9 inches around, and of course you want negative ease in a sock. So my sock would be smaller than the needles, but I think that for sleeves, for colorwork sweaters, they'll be wonderful. And I would definitely suggest giving them a try, even if you think they sound impossible, because I did not expect to like them. But these socks are really flying. I know it doesn't look like much, but I only started it, I don't know, I haven't done many active hours of work on this. I find it grows quite quickly. And I'm in a color work mood lately. Those are all of my works in progress. As I promised last time, there's a Knits in the Wild segment this week. That's going to be a lot of talking. So first, I thought I would share a fibery moment I came across in my reading. This is Moss Witch and Other Stories by Sarah Maitland. She's one of my favorite authors, and I got this book for Christmas. She writes excellent nonfiction, and I've read one of icicles just fell. I read one of her novels, and I loved that, and then I've read several of her short stories. This is the first collection I've read, but I have another one to read. So she's just wonderful, thoughtful, enchanting writer. So I would highly recommend looking into her in general. And it is actually the title story, Moss Witch, that includes the knitting segment. So a biologist who specializes in mosses is hiking in a remote area, and he comes across a moss witch, but she just seems like an eccentric old woman to him. So he woke to that low, strange murmur of language and music. He opened his eyes in disbelief, but without shock. She was quite small and obviously very old. Her face was carved with long wrinkles running up and down her forehead and cheeks. She was dressed raggedly in a loose canvas skirt and with thick, uneven woolen socks and sandals, obviously made from old silage bags. Her woolen jumper was hand-knitted, and not very well. She wore green mittens, which looked somehow damp. He was still sleepy, but when he moved a little and the moss witch turned sharply, what she saw was a smiling, foxy face, and without thinking, she smiled back. So I'm going to jump a couple paragraphs. He sat up, held out his right hand, and said, "I'm Robert." She did not reply, but offered her own, still in its mitten. It was knitted in a close textured stitch, and effortlessly he had a clear memory of his mother's swift fingers working endlessly on shame-inducing homemade garments for himself and his sister, and recalled that the pattern was called moss stitch, and this made him suddenly and fiercely happy. When he shook her hand, small in his large one, he realized that she had only one finger. So, I will forgive Sarah Maitland for implying that all hand knits are shame-inducing and lumpy, because I think that in this story that context was fine. And I've read enough of her work to realize that, she is not insulting women's work. But I really loved how he had that instant, not tactile memory, there we go. Those words are very close. Just from feeling the mitten, and I especially love that she made a pun on moss and moss stitch and moss the plants and moss witches who are connected with plants. And yeah, so this short story collection, since Sarah Maitland chatted with different scientists who are experts in their fields. One of them was an expert on mosses. And she took the scientific facts and wrote a story inspired by them. Some of them are set in the regular world with just scientists as main characters. Others have elements of speculative fantasy in them, like the Moss Witch one. And they're all very thoughtful and excellent. And after each story is a short afterword by the scientist that she talked about on the actual science. So it's a really great premise for a collection, and I enjoyed it very much. Can you tell that I've decided to just not worry about the length of my episodes from now on? Do let me know if you prefer me being more concise. But I figure since I'm only recording every 2 weeks, you can always watch half of each episode every week. And this way I get to talk about all the details to my heart's content. Hey, Moth, what you doing? I think she's decided to try to climb into the chair. Okay, so on to the final segment, which is Knits in the Wild. And since I didn't share this last week, I've got quite a few photos to show you. And it seems like you prefer it when I talk. So we'll do the voiceover this week, guys. First, I have a few outfits. I'll show you, I already showed you today's outfit, so I'm skipping that one. This one is my blush lace top, which is not hand knit, obviously. But I wore it with my little boy blue scarflet, which I knit out of Quince & Company Osprey when I began my neckwear experimentation, I think a year and a half ago. I really liked the idea of doing scarflets because they don't use much yarn, so they're quite thrifty and efficient. But in practice, for deep winter, they're just not enough. I think that they're really good for transitional weather though. So this day, I didn't need a jacket, not even a blazer. It was the first day, but there was still a little bit of wind, so having that scarflet around my neck gave me just enough warmth. It was a very sunny day too. So I was really pleased with how that looked. Please ignore the dishes in the background. Oh, I try to take photos for you guys, but you know, trying to fit photos into daily life, something's got to give. I was clearly on a blush theme, actually. The other two outfits also feature blush as well. I just tend to really like wearing pale pink in spring. I don't think I'm alone in that. So next up is my Dawn's Rosy Fingered scarf, shawl, which was a finished object last week, but I couldn't show you how I was wearing it because of my camera setup. So here it is. This is actually one of the project photos from the page, but I did wear it that day with a gray and white striped tee, and I think just jeans. No, I wore a gray full skirt too. So it was a nice touch of whimsy, and I've been wearing it quite a bit. As you can see, it's got 3 points instead of just one triangular point, which I did because I really like the number 3. It's one of my favorite numbers. Oh, but I'll talk more about this when I release the pattern. But yeah, I really like just throwing it on, and I'm getting more used to wearing shawls. Although I must say, a lot of my clothes have detailing in the yoke section, and a shawl or a cowl covers that up. So that's always been why it took me a really long time to give knitted neckwear a go, and why I've been more slow to style it than other neckwear, or than other knitted objects. I apologize, I think I've been talking too long. The last full outfit I have to show you, and I need to apologize for my hair in this photo. I have switched to a new shampoo, and the new shampoo and my very hard water and my hair are in the midst of a discussion about how frequently it needs to be used, and clearly that day my hair lost that argument. So, okay, that disclaimer out of the way. This is my Melusine cardigan, which is knit out of Prince & Company's Turn in the Wheeler Bay colorway, which is a beautiful teal, and I designed the pattern using the Twisted Stitch knitting book. And I really love Twisted Stitches. I love this cardigan. So now that it's warm enough to not need a jacket, I wore it with a sleeveless silk blouse, and that was gray. I tend to wear a lot of gray. And then blush skinnies. And this was, once again, just right for a spring day with a little bit of wind, but then also a little bit of sun. And yeah, I'm really impressed with how well my hand knit cardigans work as an outer layer for this transitional time. This is the first spring where I've really had many sweaters to choose from, so I'm really enjoying it. And now on to many accessory photos, because this is several weeks worth. Okay, so first up, I wore a gray wool peacoat with my red is blood beret and my castles in the sky shawl. And now you'll see the same gray trench coat. It was very rainy, but styled with 3 different knitted ensembles. I think that if you only have 1 or 2 coats that fit well, and that, you know, coats can be quite pricey unless, like me, you shop secondhand, varying your look if you live in a place with long winters with multiple knitwear ensembles is a great option for doing that. So the first combination you see is the April Showers hat and mitts. I designed this myself last spring out of a skein of Malabrigo Rios in the Lotus colorway. I loved this yarn in the skein, but once I knit it up, this is definitely one of my least worn hats, and the colors just don't quite flatter me. And so I'm going to ask my sister if she wants this set. And the mitts I purposely made without thumbs, just with a hole, because I wanted to be able to just push them up if I was wearing them inside to make them a little more versatile. If I were going to do this again, I wouldn't put a thumb hole in at all. I would just pull them down like extra long sleeves when it was cold out, and then push them up when I'm wearing them indoors and need to do dishes or something, because having the thumb hole, when my thumb's not through it, it gapes and makes my hands a little chilly. Anyway, I also wore my antiquarian scarf, which is out of Pearl Soho's line weight, which is their 100% merino single ply lace in the peacock colorway. This was my souvenir skein from my birthday trip to New York City last year. The next day, I styled the same trench coat with my vintage circus hat, which is also self-designed. And that is out of Quince & Company Finch and Chanterelle is that beautiful sepia color. And the burgundy stripes are Cascade Heritage sock yarn that I had left over from a pair of socks that I knit. And then I just wore a cream pashmina style wool cashmere scarf from Nordstrom that I got on eBay for like $12 because eBay is awesome. The final gray trench coat outfit, I wore my hat and glove set out of Quince & Company's Turn in Boothbay Blue. And both of these are beaded. Why can't I remember the names? Winter Morn gloves and a hint of snow tam. I knit these quite recently. And then my brioche cowl. I can't remember my project name for it right now. Blueberry Girl, because it's out of Barico Ultra Alpaca in the blueberry colorway. So I often like to dress in tonal shades of the same color. I promise I'm not sponsored by Quince & Company. Just really like their yarn. And I mentioned this in a previous episode, but as far as how I make decisions, I'm a satisfier, which means that once I found something that meets all of my criteria, and for yarn buying, I have various ethical and budgetary and functional criteria, I just tend to use that product over and over. So that's why I knit with a lot of Quince. On to a few more. We had a cold day again, so I wore my red wool coat with that same striped hat and no neckwear because that coat has a very high neck snap. And then my gloves, which you can just see out of the pocket, are out of Knit Picks Reverie, which is a brushed alpaca, which makes great gloves because they're super warm but very lightweight. My hands tend to get really cold, and so fingering weight gloves only work for me if it's above freezing. Below freezing, I tend to wear mittens, but my alpaca gloves are just as warm. And finally, we have two outerwear combinations from one of the warmer days. So in the first one, I am wearing a vintage wool blazer in that neat tapestry print that I thrifted ages ago. I still lived in Colorado, with the little boy blue scarflet, just for an extra touch of jauntiness. And then I am wearing a gray velvet jacket, which I got on eBay, with my antiquarian scarf. And of course, I can't include my socks in any of these outerwear photos or even the outfit photos just because it's really hard to get a head to toe shot, but I am always wearing socks, hand knit socks. So those are all of my Knit in the Wild options. Oh wait, I just remembered my friend Erin, who is Ersiku, E-R-S-I-K-U, sent in a Knits in the Wild for the podcast. I'm super excited, so I will add that photo here. And she wanted me to share her cowl. So these are two different versions of the same cowl pattern, which is free from Pearl Soho, and they're both knit out of Anzula Cloud yarn, which is a light fingering. And she loves the cowls, but admits that the pattern is boring and physically demanding. So it's a bit of a trade-off, but obviously the finished object was worth it for her since she knitted twice. And so yeah, people have me. If you want your Knits in the Wild featured on the podcast, just send me an email, thetarmofit@gmail.com, with the subject Knits in the Wild and a photo attached and any details you want me to include. We also have a thread in my Ravelry group that's entitled Your Knits in the Wild, and so you can share your photos there and admire everyone else's outfits if you want to see them but maybe not be on YouTube. Totally up to you. You can also participate on Instagram by just tagging any photo with the hashtag Knits in the Wild, all together, no spaces, and I would love to see how you style your hand knits. That's the episode for this week. I've double-checked my show notes, and I've talked about everything that I needed to talk about. I would love to hear from you. The easiest ways to contact me are either on Ravelry. My username is The Charm of It. You can send me a direct message. You can add me to your friends, and if you'd like, you can join the Ravelry group, which is also The Charm of It. All these links are always included down in the YouTube thing, as well as on my blog show notes. And there are various discussion threads in the group, and I actually like that it's a little smaller. I think it's more approachable that way. And then the other best way to contact me, and it can take me a few days to reply to things, up to like a week or two, but I read them all right away, and I love that. It's just with my physical issues, typing and that kind of stuff, I have to ration it out. But I will reply to you, and I just love it whenever anyone reaches out to me. So you can also always leave comments on the YouTube channel, and then I'm very active on Instagram. I am The Charm of It there as well. I post quite a few photos every day of knitting and the pets and books I'm reading, and then sometimes random photos as well. I really love Instagram. Although I will warn you, I tend to only use my phone for my photos, so they're not as pretty as my big camera would do. But I love meeting new friends on Instagram. It's probably the way that I socialize most over the internet these days. And so feel free to leave comments on any of my photos, or just tag me on your photos so that I see them. And then we can start a little dialogue and get to know each other, because I started this podcast in order to have a little online knitting circle. And I'm just overwhelmed by all of the response and support that I've gotten over these past few months. And now that I have more subscribers, I worry that any new subscribers might think that I am somehow unapproachable or no longer interested in new friends or that kind of thing. And that could not be further from the truth. I would love to meet new people all the time, and yeah, so feel free to contact me if you'd like. I do respond most quickly to Instagram caption stuff just because I'm on it a lot. And is that all in this rambling summation? No, one more thing. Since I know that sometimes it can be tricky to find podcasts with what I think of as hyper knitting focus, where pretty much all you talk about is knitting and that kind of thing, or at least crafts, as opposed to a lot of other random subjects or yarn buying or that kind of stuff. So I thought I would try to share at least one podcast that I come across every episode, so that you have something new to check out, because I know that I love it when my favorite podcaster suggests new podcasts, because that's just the easiest way to find more. So this week, I would like to tell you about Threaded with Fiber. I've misplaced my show notes. I apologize for any thumping. I hope the camera's not picking that up. My neighbor is home. This is what he does at 2 a.m. Okay, so I've misplaced my show note, but it's Threaded with Fiber, and there will be a link in the show notes, and it's Fiber, F-I-B-R-E, because she is British, and she is the Beaded Butterfly on Instagram and Ravelry, and her podcast is great. It covers knitting, sewing, and both a little bit of garment sewing, and then a lot of handwork sewing, so like embroidery, cross-stitch, tapestry. Her latest episode goes into a lot of sewing, and she tends to do a lot of like branching out on her own or modifying patterns, and she talks a lot about the different yarns that she's working with and why she likes those fibers and all that kind of thing. So if you enjoy fiber nerdery, I'm pretty sure that you will enjoy this podcast. She also has some adorable pets, including a puppy. And she is a very, very sweet person who I love chatting with on Instagram as well. So that's the podcast recommendation for this week. And I've got a few saved up, so you'll be getting at least one on the next few episodes, in case you want to be watching more things on YouTube this afternoon or evening or whenever you are viewing me. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I will chat with you guys again in 2 weeks. Until then, feel free to update me on your own knitting adventures, either in the Ravelry group or on Instagram. And bye for now. Both the pets are asleep in my lap. But since Thistle got a haircut, her ears are so big, you gotta wave goodbye with those ears. She's such a long-suffering puppy. Bye, guys.